Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. If my team loses, I'll let you turn me into your perfect woman for a night. Those foolish words sealed my fate. Staring into the mirror, balancing on precarious heels, I'm about to discover a secret world of silk, shame, and an awakening that will change absolutely everything. My name is Nathan. I am, or at least I thought I was, a thoroughly average 27-year-old guy. My life revolved around weekend football matches, keeping my running times competitive, and avoiding anything overly complicated. I certainly never imagined that a profoundly stupid bet with my girlfriend, Emily, would completely shatter the comfortable, masculine box I had lived inside my entire life. It all started on a Tuesday evening during the finals. The tension in the living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily, sipping her wine with a mysterious, knowing smirk, had proposed the wager just before kickoff. With the blind arrogance of a loyal fan, I had eagerly accepted. Fast forward 2 agonizing hours and the final whistle blew. My team had been utterly dismantled. Well, Emily purred, setting her wine glass down with a definitive clink. She didn't say another word, but the mischievous glint in her eyes sent a sudden, icy shiver down my spine. She grabbed her coat and walked out the door, leaving me alone with my impending doom. When she returned an hour later, she wasn't empty-handed. She carried 2 large, glossy shopping bags, placing them onto the living room table like instruments of torture. My heart began to drum a frantic, erratic beat against my ribs. "Emily, sweet mercy, what is all that?" I stammered, my eyes locked on the bags. "Your punishment, my dear Nathan," she said, her voice dripping with playful authority. "You promised to be my perfect woman for the night, and a perfect woman needs the proper attire." With deliberate slowness, she pulled out the items one by one. First came an emerald green chiffon dress with long, sheer puffy sleeves and a subtle golden polka dot pattern. It was undeniably beautiful, but the mere thought of it draped over my body made my throat go dry. Next came a pair of black pointed-toe stiletto heels at least 3 inches high. And finally, she withdrew a set of black lace undergarments. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. Despite my regular gym sessions, I had a runner's physique, lean, wiry, and relatively hairless, but I was still undeniably a man. Looking at those tiny scraps of delicate lace and elastic, a wave of pure, unfiltered panic washed over me. "Emily, good grief, can we please swap punishments? I'll do the dishes for a year, I'll clean the gutters." This is my first time even touching something like this." She shook her head, an uncompromising smile on her lips. "There is no first-time escape clause. Nathan, a bet is a bet. Now, take off that boring t-shirt and those rigid jeans. It's time you found out what it feels like to have real fabric against your skin." My hands were legitimately trembling as I stripped down to my bare skin. The air in the apartment suddenly felt 10 degrees colder, or perhaps it was just my nerves. Emily handed me the black lace panties first. The material was impossibly thin, practically weightless. Stepping into them felt incredibly wrong, yet jarringly sensational. As I pulled them up, the elastic bands snapped gently against my waist. They were snug, compressing me in a way that felt entirely foreign. The smooth satin and intricate lace rubbed against my skin, sending a bizarre flutter of nervous energy straight to my core. Next came the bra. I had unhooked a few in my time, but putting one on was an entirely different logistical nightmare. Emily stepped behind me, stifling a giggle as she secured the hooks against the middle of my back. "Breathe, Nathan," she whispered. I adjusted the straps, feeling the padded cups settle against my flat chest. They didn't just sit there, they pressed into my ribs, creating a phantom illusion of curves. A constant, physical reminder strapped to my torso that my role had fundamentally shifted. A fierce psychological battle raged in my head. I am a man. This is ridiculous. I shouldn't be feeling this nervous, or this curious. But the transformation had barely begun. Emily tossed me a sealed packet of sheer black pantyhose. "Roll them up from the toes, carefully," she instructed, taking a seat on the edge of the sofa to watch her masterpiece unfold. "If you run a nail through them, you owe me another pair." Sitting on the edge of the coffee table, I carefully gathered the delicate nylon mesh. Slipping my feet in, I slowly pulled them up over my calves and thighs. The sensation was absolutely mind-boggling. The sheer fabric caught slightly on my fine leg hairs before compressing them down, hugging my leg muscles in a tight, sleek embrace. The friction of the nylon against itself as I crossed my legs was slippery and entirely alien. It felt incredibly vulnerable, yet there was a bizarrely comforting layer of security in being so tightly wrapped. Then came the dress. I lifted my arms, and Emily guided the emerald chiffon over my head. The material cascaded down my torso like cool water. It was virtually weightless compared to my heavy denim and cotton shirts. She tied the ribbon at the waist, cinching it in. The fabric flared beautifully over my hips, the hem stopping elegantly just above my knees. "Now the crowning glory," Emily announced, pointing at the black stilettos. I stared at the menacing arch of the shoes, holding my breath. I wedged my feet inside. The moment I stood up, my ankles wobbled violently. "Holy heartache," I yelped, my arms flailing as I desperately sought the wall for balance. The angle forced my calves into an immediate burning flex. My center of gravity was entirely thrown off, forcing my hips slightly forward and my shoulders back just to keep from toppling over face first. "You look like a newborn giraffe," Emily laughed, grabbing my arm to steady me. "Take smaller steps. Put one foot in front of the other, heel first, then toe." I practiced pacing across the living room carpet. With each step, the hem of the chiffon dress brushed gently against the nylon covering my thighs. It was a symphony of soft textures I had never experienced. My mind was reeling. The physical sensations were so overwhelming, so uniquely feminine, that it became impossible to act like a typical guy. The clothes literally demanded that I move differently, walk differently, exist differently. "Sit down," Emily ordered gently, pulling out a vanity chair. "We aren't done." For the next 45 minutes, I was completely at her mercy. She tied my short hair back flat against my scalp and secured a wig cap. Then she began the makeup. I closed my eyes, feeling the soft bristles of her brushes sweeping across my cheekbones. The cold, creamy texture of liquid foundation was painted over my skin, followed by a flurry of setting powders. I felt a pencil carefully lining my eyelids, and the strange, sticky weight of mascara coating my lashes. Finally, she applied a coat of matte, dark red lipstick, the waxy substance making my lips feel unusually full and prominent. "Keep your eyes closed," she said. I felt a heavy, voluminous cascade of hair fall onto my shoulders as she positioned a stunning wavy brunette wig onto my head. She pinned it securely, adjusting the fringe to frame my face perfectly. "Okay, open." I slowly lifted my eyelids and looked into the full-length mirror. My breath caught in my throat. I completely froze. The person staring back at me was not Nathan. The sharp angles of my jaw had been miraculously softened by contouring. My blue eyes looked massive, deep, and sultry beneath the thick lashes and precise eyeliner. The dark red lips provided a striking contrast to the emerald green of the dress. The padded bra created a gentle, realistic swell beneath the chiffon. And the pantyhose gave my legs an immaculate, flawless finish. I was beautiful. It was a terrifying, gut-wrenching, yet intensely euphoric realization. A deep blush rushed to my heavily powdered cheeks. My inner defenses, the walls of my male ego, began to crack. The shame I expected to feel was overshadowed by a hypnotic fascination. I slowly reached up, my manicured press-on nails touching my own cheek in absolute disbelief. Who is that?" I whispered, my voice sounding far too coarse for the elegant creature in the glass. Emily stepped up behind me in the reflection, resting her chin on my padded shoulder. She looked incredibly proud of her work. "That," she smiled softly, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror, "is Olivia, and Olivia is coming with me to the charity gala downtown tonight." My stomach dropped to the floor. "A gala, Emily, out of your mind." "I can't go out in public. People will know. Everyone will stare." "They will definitely stare," she corrected, patting my arm. "But not for the reason you think. You look absolutely stunning. Now grab your clutch, Olivia, the Uber is waiting outside, and we have a very long night ahead of us." As I took my first tentative wobbling steps out of the apartment, the cool night air hit my nylon-clad legs, sending a rush of goosebumps across my skin. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. I was stepping out of my sanctuary, leaving Nathan behind the locked door, and carrying Olivia out into the unforgiving, brightly lit world. The fear was paralyzing, but deep down, beneath the layers of chiffon and lace, a tiny, undeniable spark of excitement had just been ignited. The Uber ride to the venue was my first grueling lesson in the sheer mechanics of existing as a woman. Sliding onto the leather back seat was a logistical nightmare. Because of the sheer black pantyhose, my thighs had zero friction against the seat, meaning I practically slid from one side of the car to the other every time the driver took a turn. Good heavens, Emily, I'm sliding around like a pat of butter in a hot skillet. I whispered frantically, gripping the door handle to stabilize myself. My knees were locked tightly together, an unnatural posture for me, but absolutely mandatory considering the hem of the emerald chiffon dress rested just a few inches above my kneecaps. Emily merely giggled, expertly touching up her own lipstick in her compact mirror. Keep your core tight, Olivia. Posture is everything. Shoulders back, chest out. Following her instructions forced the padded underwire of the bra to press more firmly against my ribcage. The sensation was maddeningly constant. Every breath I took was restricted by the tight band of lace and the cinched waist of the dress. It was a suffocating, yet strangely securing embrace that constantly reminded me you are not a man tonight. When the car finally pulled up to the grand marble entrance of the downtown hotel, my heart began to hammer a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. The valet opened the door, and the cool night air immediately bit through the sheer chiffon sleeves, sending a shiver down my spine that made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end beneath the fabric. Stepping out was a terrifying leap of faith. The moment my 3-inch stiletto met the pavement, a shockwave of instability shot up my leg. I had to consciously force my hips to sway just to keep my center of gravity aligned. Every step felt like a highly calculated math equation. Heel 2, balance, heel 2, don't fall and break your neck. The muscles in my calves were screaming in protest, tightened into a permanent burning flex. Holy macaroni, how do you endure this torture? I hissed through a painfully forced smile, linking my arm desperately through Emily's as we approached the grand glass doors. Beauty is pain, darling, she hummed proudly. Now, chin up, show them what I created. The moment we stepped into the grand ballroom, a wave of warm air, classical string music, and the low hum of hundreds of conversations washed over us. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling, fractured light across the room, illuminating a sea of crisp black tuxedos and glittering evening gowns. I instantly shrank internally, my male ego screaming at me to run, to rip off the wig, to wipe off the lipstick before the pointing and the laughter began. I braced myself for the humiliation. I waited for someone to shout, "Look at that guy in a dress!" But the shout never came. Instead, something infinitely more shocking happened. As we navigated the edge of the dance floor, a group of men in sharp suits glanced our way. They didn't snicker. They didn't point. They paused their conversation, their eyes tracing the flow of my emerald dress, lingering respectfully on the curve of my nylon-clad legs, and finally settling on my heavily contoured face. One of them actually offered a polite, appreciative nod. My breath hitched. They don't know. My brain registered with a jolt of sheer panic, closely followed by an intoxicating, vertigo-inducing wave of euphoria. They think I am a woman. They think I am beautiful. That tiny spark of realization ignited something deeply suppressed within me. The crushing shame I had carried in the car evaporated, replaced by an addictive, nervous thrill. The heavy makeup, the swish of the chiffon against my thighs, the restrictive pinch of the lace underwear. It all suddenly felt like a magnificent suit of armor. I wasn't Nathan pretending to be a girl. In this room, under these lights, I was Olivia. "I'm going to grab us some champagne from the bar," Emily announced, her eyes dancing with mischief. "Wait right here by this pillar. Don't go anywhere." "Wait, Emily, please don't leave me alone," I pleaded in a panicked whisper. But she was already vanishing into the crowd, leaving me totally exposed. I stood there, gripping my small satin clutch with both hands as if it were a life raft. I tried to remember everything I had ever observed about how women stood. I crossed one ankle gently behind the other, popped my hips slightly to relieve the burning ache in my right heel, and tried to look thoughtfully at a nearby ice sculpture. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my padded chest. "Excuse me, but you look like you might be fighting a small, private war with those shoes." The voice came from behind me, deep, warm, and rich like aged oak. I gasped, spinning around on my heels so quickly that I nearly lost my balance. A large, strong hand instantly shot out, gently catching my elbow to steady me. "Easy there." The man chuckled softly. He was incredibly handsome, likely in his early 30s, wearing a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo. His hair was impeccably styled, and his dark eyes held a mixture of polite concern and undeniable charm. Absolute terror gripped my throat. If I opened my mouth and let out my normal, masculine baritone voice, the illusion would shatter into a million jagged pieces. My mind raced. I couldn't just stare at him like a deer in headlights. Summoning every ounce of theatrical courage I possessed, I lowered my chin slightly, looking up at him through the thick, heavy curtain of my false eyelashes. I took a shallow breath and forced my voice into a soft, airy, breathy whisper barely more than a sigh. "Thank you. I'm just a little out of practice tonight." The man smiled, seemingly captivated by the artificial shyness of my whispered tone. To him, it wasn't a man hiding his voice. It was a demure, elegant woman acting coy. "I'm Arthur," he said, offering a slight bow of his head. "And if you don't mind me saying, that green dress is absolutely mesmerizing against your skin. It would be a crime to let it stand still all night. Would you do me the honor of a slow dance? It might take your mind off the heels." My brain short-circuited. Dance with a man. The Nathan inside me was pounding on the glass, yelling at me to decline, to make an excuse, to flee to the men's room. But my body betrayed me. Or perhaps my body was finally telling the truth. The chiffon brushed gently against my knees, and the scent of Arthur's expensive cedarwood cologne washed over me. It was intoxicating. Before I could stop myself, my manicured hand reached out and rested delicately in his large, warm palm. I would like that," I breathed. Arthur led me gently onto the polished wooden floor just as the band transitioned into a slow, sultry jazz number. He turned to me, placing his right hand firmly on the curve of my waist. Even through the fabric of the dress, the heat of his hand radiated through the cinched ribbon, sending a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. I tentatively placed my left hand on his broad shoulder, suddenly hyper-aware of how petite and fragile I felt in this get-up. Even in my 3-inch stilettos, I had to look up to meet his eyes. As we began to sway, the last remnants of my rigid, masculine posture crumbled into dust. Arthur's lead was confident and protective. I didn't have to think, I just had to follow. The friction of my nylon-clad thighs brushing together beneath the dress as I stepped backward was a constant, dizzying reminder of my femininity. He pulled me an inch closer, our chest almost touching. The padded cups of my bra pressed gently against his solid chest. My heart was beating so fiercely I was terrified he would feel it. "You're very quiet," Arthur murmured, his breath warm against my ear. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up beneath the heavy brunette wig. "There's a beautiful sort of mystery about you, a mix of wild hesitation and absolute elegance. I really like it." I closed my eyes, entirely overwhelmed by a sensory explosion. The gentle pressure of his hand on the small of my back, the soft caress of the wig falling over my shoulder, the sheer weightlessness of the chiffon twirling around my legs. For 27 years, I had been the one expected to lead, to be strong, to be the unyielding rock. But in Arthur's arms, spinning under the crystal chandeliers, I was allowed to be soft. I was allowed to be delicate. I was being cherished, admired, and protected. It was the most terrifyingly beautiful feeling I had ever experienced in my entire life. "Thank you, Arthur," I whispered against his collar, entirely lost in the role. "My name is Olivia." When the music finally faded, Arthur didn't immediately let go. His thumb softly brushed the silk ribbon at my waist before he took a respectful half-step back, bowing over my hand and pressing a gentle, fleeting kiss to my knuckles. "A pleasure, Olivia. I truly hope the rest of your evening is as beautiful as you are." As he turned and walked away into the crowd, leaving the scent of cedar in his wake, I stood frozen on the dance floor. The warmth of his hand still lingered on my waist. "Well, well, well," Emily's voice chimed from behind me. I turned to see her holding 2 flutes of champagne, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound fascination. "I leave you alone for 5 minutes, and you're already breaking hearts. How was it? I looked down at the black stilettos, then traced a finger over the smooth lace of the bodice covering my ribs. The embarrassment was completely gone, replaced by a deep, terrifying ache in my chest. I looked up at Emily, my false eyelashes fluttering as I whispered a truth that would change my life forever. I didn't want him to let me go. The ride back to our apartment was cloaked in a heavy, suffocating silence. Sitting in the back of the cab, I stared blankly at the passing streetlights, their yellow glows reflecting off the sheer black nylon stretching over my knees. Every time the car went over a bump, the delicate fabric of the emerald chiffon brushed against my thighs. I held my satin clutch tightly in my lap, terrified that if I let go, the spell would break. Emily didn't say much. She simply watched me from the corner of her eye, her expression a complicated mixture of triumph, surprise, and a budding sense of concern. When we finally walked through our front door, the reality of the situation hit me like a splash of ice water. I reached down to unbuckle the ankle straps of the stilettos. Sweet mother of pearl, my arches are screaming. I groaned, finally slipping my aching feet out of the heels. Stepping onto the soft living room carpet in just my pantyhose felt like heaven. But the relief was immediately overshadowed by a profound, hollow ache spreading through my chest. It was time to take Olivia off. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. With trembling fingers, I pulled the bobby pins out of the wig. As I lifted the heavy cascade of wavy brunette hair off my head, tossing it onto the counter, my own messy, sweaty male hair sprang back to life. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked at the man staring back at me, his face still painted with flawless foundation, heavy eyeliner, and matte red lips. Taking a makeup wipe, I dragged it harshly across my mouth. The red smeared across my cheek, making me look like a tragic clown. I scrubbed away the eyeliner, the contour, the powder, until the sharp, rigid angles of Nathan's face fully returned. Next came the dress. I reached around to unzip the back, the chiffon sliding off my shoulders and falling into a puddle of emerald green at my nylon-clad feet. I reached back again to unhook the black lace bra. The moment the clasp popped open and the tight compressive band released my ribs, my lungs expanded fully for the first time in hours. The padded cups fell away. My chest was flat, bare, and distinctly male again. Lastly, I peeled off the pantyhose and the lace panties, tossing them into the laundry hamper. I stood there in my standard boxer briefs, expecting to feel a wave of masculine relief. I expected to laugh it off, grab a beer from the fridge, and joke with Emily about how ridiculous the whole bet had been. But as I stared at my broad shoulders, my flat chest, and my thick neck, I didn't feel relief. I felt utterly empty. I felt like I was wearing a poorly fitted costume, a meat suit of masculinity that I suddenly couldn't bear to look at. The faint, lingering scent of Arthur's cedarwood cologne still clung to my collarbone, a ghostly reminder of the woman I had been just an hour ago, the woman who had been held, the woman who had been admired. Emily called out from the bedroom, pulling me out of my trance. "Are you all right in there?" "Yeah," I lied, my voice sounding far too loud, too deep, too rough. Just scrubbing this mascara off is a nightmare. That night, lying in bed next to Emily, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I was terrified. The sturdy, unshakable wall of my male ego hadn't just cracked, it had completely pulverized. The obsession didn't fade with the morning sun. If anything, it only grew sharper. 2 days later, Emily left for a long shift at the design firm. The moment the front door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone in the apartment, a magnetic force pulled me directly into our bedroom. I stood in front of Emily's closet, my heart hammering a guilty, frantic beat against my ribs. "I am a man. This is absolutely absurd. I'm just curious. That's all," I chanted to myself, trying to rationalize the overwhelming urge possessing my body, but my hands were already moving. Emily was tall and athletic, meaning her wardrobe was surprisingly accommodating to my frame. I bypassed the casual jeans and t-shirts, my fingers trailing over silk blouses, satin skirts, and soft knits. Finally, I pulled out a crimson-red knit sweater dress that hugged the body, a wide black leather waist-cinching belt, and a fresh pair of sheer black tights. The process of dressing this time wasn't driven by a bet. It was driven by a desperate, agonizing thirst. I quickly stripped off my sweatpants and t-shirt. I found one of Emily's plain black underwire bras, snapping it closed behind my back. A rush of pure dopamine flooded my brain. The tight constriction around my ribs no longer felt restrictive. It felt like a warm, secure embrace. It was an anchor. I rolled the sheer black tights up my legs, marveling at how the nylon instantly transformed my masculine calves into smooth, sleek pillars of femininity. The friction of the fabric pulling up over my thighs made me bite my lower lip in a mix of nervousness and sheer delight. I slipped the crimson sweater dress over my head, smoothing the knit fabric down over my hips. It was tight, dangerously tight. I wrapped the wide black belt around my midsection and pulled it snug, creating the artificial illusion of a cinched waist. Sitting at Emily's vanity, my hands were surprisingly steady. I carefully applied the foundation, dusted my cheeks with a peach blush, and painstakingly drew a sharp wing of eyeliner across my upper lids. I slipped the brunette wig back onto my head, brushing the curls until they framed my softened face. Finally, I slid my feet into a pair of black suede ankle boots with a 2-inch block heel. When I finally stood up and looked in the full-length mirror, a tear actually formed in the corner of my eye. Nathan was dead. He was completely gone. Olivia was standing there, wrapped in crimson red and black nylon, breathing heavily, completely overwhelmed by her own existence. The shame was melting away, rapidly being replaced by a terrifying euphoric addiction. For the next 3 weeks, this became my secret ritual. Every time Emily left the house, the sweatpants came off, and the pantyhose went on. I started ordering my own things online, shipping them to an Amazon locker under a fake name. A push-up bra to give me more realistic cleavage, a pair of silicone hip pads to smooth out my boyish figure, higher heels, bolder lipsticks. The sensory experience of existing in women's clothing became the only time I felt truly at peace. The silky slide of a slip dress, the gentle jingle of hoop earrings against my jawline, the rhythmic click-clack of my heels on the hardwood floor. It was a symphony of femininity that I was learning to conduct. But the walls of the apartment were starting to feel too small. It happened on a crisp Tuesday night. The clock read 11:30 p.m. Emily was fast asleep in the bedroom, exhausted from a major presentation. I was in the living room, fully dressed in a tan, pleated midi skirt, a soft cream-colored cashmere sweater, thick opaque black tights, and a stylish wool trench coat. My makeup was subtle, just a bit of mascara, a rosy lip tint, and some BB cream. My heart was beating so fiercely I could feel the pulse in my fingertips. I wanted to feel the night air on my skin. I wanted to see if Olivia could survive outside the shadows of a gala. Trembling like a leaf, I unlocked the front door and slipped out into the hallway. Stepping out onto the street was a monumental leap into the abyss. The cool autumn wind immediately caught the hem of my pleated skirt, lifting it gently and swirling the fabric around my nylon-clad thighs. The sensation was electrifying. Walking in a skirt outdoors required a completely different spatial awareness. I kept my knees close together, taking small, measured steps, my block-heeled boots striking the concrete with a sharp, feminine rhythm. I walked 2 blocks down to the local 24-hour convenience store, my hands buried deep in the pockets of my trench coat to hide my knuckles. Every time a car drove past, my breath hitched, terrified that they would slam on their brakes, roll down the window and scream at the man in a skirt. But no one slowed down. No one cared. I pushed open the glass door of the convenience store, the little bell chiming above my head. The fluorescent lights were blinding. I kept my head down, the wavy brunette wig shielding the sides of my face, and quickly grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge. I walked up to the counter, my stomach tied in 1,000 agonizing knots. The cashier, an older man reading a newspaper, barely looked up as he scanned the bottle. "That'll be $2, miss," he grunted, reaching his hand out for the cash. The word hit me like a bolt of lightning. Miss. He hadn't paused. He hadn't squinted. He had just glanced at my coat, my hair, my painted nails, handing him the bill, and casually tossed out the ultimate validation. "Keep the change," I whispered in my softest, most breathless tone, grabbing the bottle and turning toward the door. As I pushed the door open, a man in a thick jacket was rushing in, looking down at his phone. We collided slightly, shoulder to shoulder. The impact knocked my satin clutch from under my arm, sending it tumbling onto the tiled floor. "Oh gosh, my apologies," the man said hastily. Before I could bend down, he scooped up the purse and handed it back to me. His eyes briefly met mine, sweeping over my makeup, the soft cashmere sweater, and the delicate way I was holding myself together. He offered a polite, apologetic smile. "I should watch where I'm going. Have a safe night, ma'am." "Thank you," I breathed, clutching the purse to my padded chest. I practically floated all the way back to my apartment building. I wasn't scared anymore. I was intoxicated. Two different strangers, under harsh lighting, at close proximity, had looked at me and seen a woman. They hadn't seen Nathan playing dress-up. They had seen Olivia living her life. Leaning against the closed door of my apartment, I slowly slid down to the floor, pulling my knees up to my chest. The wool of the skirt scratched pleasantly against the nylon of my tights. I buried my face in my hands, a mixture of joyous laughter and terrified tears spilling down my cheeks, ruining my carefully applied mascara. I was at the point of no return. The cage had been opened. Nathan was a ghost, a shell I was forcing myself to wear during the day. But here, in the dead of night, smelling of floral perfume and cashmere, Olivia was alive. And I knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, that she was never going back in the box. The collision course between my two lives was inevitable. I had spent nearly 3 months tiptoeing along the razor's edge, carefully compartmentalizing Nathan and Olivia. Nathan went to his drab office job, nodding along to sports talk over lunch, wearing rigid slacks and suffocating dress shirts that felt increasingly like a straitjacket. But the second I had a moment alone, whether Emily was at work, out with friends, or fast asleep, Olivia would claw her way out. The physical toll of this double life was exhausting, but the psychological toll was becoming unbearable. The brief adrenaline rushes of my midnight grocery runs were no longer enough to satisfy the deep, aching void in my chest. Olivia didn't just want to exist in the shadows anymore. She was demanding a seat at the table. The breaking point arrived on a gloomy Sunday afternoon. The plan was supposed to be simple, a quick lunch with my parents at their suburban home. It was a mandatory monthly ritual that Nathan usually endured with minimal fuss. But as I stood in the apartment staring at my closet, the prospect of forcing myself into denim jeans and a stiff button-down shirt made my stomach physically churn with nausea. I can't do it, I thought, my hands gripping the edge of the wardrobe until my knuckles turned white. I simply cannot put those male clothes on my body today. I glanced at the hidden garment bag shoved to the very back of the rack. Inside hung the outfit I had meticulously ordered online 3 weeks prior. A beautiful, tailored burgundy jumpsuit with a tasteful, slightly plunging neckline that cinched aggressively at the waist. It came with a matching, sharply cut, cream-colored blazer. My heart began to pound a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. "Are you absolutely insane?" The last surviving shred of Nathan's logic screamed in my head. "They are your parents. Your traditional, conservative parents." But my hands were already unzipping the garment bag. Dressing myself that afternoon was not a rush of euphoria. It was an act of grim, terrifying determination. I snapped my padded push-up bra into place, ensuring the silicone inserts created a modest but undeniable cleavage beneath the jumpsuit's neckline. I pulled a pair of sheer nude pantyhose up my legs, the nylon whispering softly against my skin, creating a flawless feminine foundation. Stepping into the burgundy jumpsuit, I pulled the zipper up my side. The fabric hugged my waist tightly before flaring out slightly at the hips, instantly feminizing my silhouette. I slipped into a pair of modest 2-inch nude pumps, slipped the cream blazer over my shoulders, and sat down at the vanity. My hands shook so violently I had to restart my eyeliner twice. I didn't go for heavy evening glam. I aimed for an elegant, daytime sophistication, a subtle peach blush, soft brown eyeshadow, and a matte rose lipstick. I pinned a sleek, straight, honey blonde wig securely to my scalp, letting the smooth locks fall neatly over my shoulders. I stared into the mirror. Olivia stared back, looking undeniably professional, poised, and utterly feminine. But beneath the heavy layer of setting spray and contour, I was absolutely terrified. When I finally pulled my car into my parents' driveway, It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to throw the vehicle into reverse and speed away. My palms were sweating profusely against the steering wheel. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I grabbed my cream-colored handbag, opened the door, and stepped out. The clicking of my low heels against the concrete walkway sounded like gunshots to my ears. Each step was heavy with impending doom. I reached the front door, squeezed my eyes shut, and pressed the doorbell. Footsteps approached from inside. The lock clicked, and the heavy oak door swung inward. My mother, Sarah, stood there wiping her hands on a dish towel. A bright, welcoming smile plastered across her face. "Nathan, sweetheart, you're just in time." Her voice abruptly died in her throat. The dish towel slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor. The color completely drained from her face, her eyes widening in absolute unadulterated shock. She took a slow, trembling step backward, her gaze sweeping over the blonde hair, the makeup, the delicate curve of my waist in the burgundy jumpsuit, and finally landing on the nude heels on my feet. For 10 agonizing seconds, the silence in the entryway was deafening. I felt completely exposed, like a raw nerve plunged into ice water. My manicured fingers tightened painfully around the strap of my handbag. "Mom," I croaked, trying to keep my voice as soft and neutral as possible. But it still sounded shockingly deep compared to my appearance. "It's me." "What? What is happening out here?" A gruff voice boomed from the hallway. My father, Robert, rounded the corner holding the Sunday paper. He stopped dead in his tracks. If my mother's reaction was shock, my father's was pure, immediate fury. The veins in his thick neck instantly bulged, and his face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. He stared at me as if a grotesque monster had just kicked down his front door. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, his voice rattling the picture frames on the wall. "Is this some kind of sick joke? Nathan Halloween isn't for another 6 months." The instinct to flee, to apologize, to rip off the wig and beg for forgiveness was incredibly strong. But as the fear washed over me, a strange, resilient anchor dropped into the pit of my stomach. The soft compression of the bra against my ribs, the cool sensation of the pantyhose hugging my calves, the swish of the fabric against my ankles, these weren't just clothes anymore. They were my armor. They were my truth. I squared my shoulders, raising my chin defensively. "It's not a joke, Dad, and it's not a costume." "Have you completely lost your mind?" he roared, stepping closer, his large hands balled into tight fists at his sides. "You march your backside into the bathroom, scrub that filth off your face, take off those ridiculous clothes, and walk out of there like a man. You are embarrassing this family." His words slashed through the air like invisible blades. A year ago, I would have crumbled under his authoritarian anger. But something within me had fundamentally shifted. The armor held. "No," I said, my voice wavering slightly but gaining volume. I didn't reach up to adjust the wig. I didn't try to hide my heels. I stood my ground, staring directly into my father's furious eyes. "I am not going to scrub this off, Dad," I continued, tears aggressively pricking the corners of my eyes, threatening to ruin my mascara. "Because when I wear these clothes, I'm not afraid. I'm not acting anymore. The man you thought you knew, the man you expected me to be, he was the costume. This body, this presentation, the way these clothes make me feel, it is the truest thing I have ever known. Her name is Olivia, and she is who I actually am." My mother suddenly burst into deep, wretched sobs. She practically collapsed against the entryway table, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with the weight of mourning the son she thought she had. My father stood frozen, his chest heaving, his fists shaking with suppressed rage and incomprehension. He looked at me with a profound, terrifying disgust. "I have no daughter," he spat, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get out of my house, and do not come back until you are ready to be a man." He spun on his heel and stormed out of the hallway, slamming the heavy wooden door of his study with a final, echoing crash that reverberated through my bones. The rejection felt like a physical blow to the stomach. My knees went weak, and for a moment, the nude heels felt precariously unsteady. I looked down at my mother, who was still weeping softly against the table. I took a hesitant step toward her, reaching out a manicured hand. "Mom, please," I whispered. a single tear escaping my eye and trailing down my heavily contoured cheek. She flinched away slightly before looking up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, full of confusion and pain, but beneath it all, a faint glimmer of maternal instinct fought through the shock. She slowly reached out, her fingers gently brushing the fabric of my cream blazer. "Oh, Nathan, oh, my sweet child," she sobbed, not quite ready to use the name Olivia, but desperately trying to process the elegant stranger standing in her hallway. I don't understand any of this. Why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't know how," I whispered, my voice breaking completely. "You need to go," she said softly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, glancing nervously toward the closed study door. "Your father's, he needs time. He's a proud, stubborn man. He can't process this right now." I nodded slowly, the hollow ache in my chest expanding to consume my entire body. I turned away, gripping the handle of my purse tightly. As I walked back down the driveway, the tears finally flowed freely, ruining my makeup, stinging my eyes, and leaving streaky tracks of foundation down my neck. I drove aimlessly for an hour, entirely consumed by grief. The ultimate line had been crossed. The bridge wasn't just burned, it had been entirely demolished. But amidst the overwhelming sorrow of losing my father's acceptance, a quiet, stubborn flame continued to burn brightly within my chest. I parked the car by the edge of the lake and pulled down the visor mirror. I looked like a disaster. My eyeliner was running down my cheeks in dark, inky rivers. My wig was slightly askew. I looked incredibly vulnerable, battered, and utterly exhausted. But as I grabbed a tissue from my purse and began carefully dabbing away the ruined makeup, I caught my own reflection again. The padded cleavage, the burgundy fabric, the soft drape of the blonde hair over my shoulders. My father had ordered me to leave. He had demanded I take it all off and return as a man. I slowly pulled a fresh lipstick from my purse, clicked the cap off, and carefully reapplied the rosy tint to my lips, smoothing the edges perfectly. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered into the empty car, clicking the lipstick tube shut with a definitive snap. "But Nathan isn't coming back." The fallout from the confrontation with my parents sent shockwaves through every corner of my existence. Returning to the apartment that evening, the heavy silence of the empty rooms pressed down on me like a physical weight. I sat on the edge of the bed in my burgundy jumpsuit, staring blankly at the wall for hours, the emotional exhaustion leaving me hollow and numb. When Emily finally returned from work later that night, she found me sitting exactly where I had collapsed, my makeup completely ruined by a fresh wave of silent tears. She didn't ask questions immediately. She just sat next to me, wrapped her arms around my shoulders, and let me cry against her chest, careful not to crush the wig or ruin the expensive fabric of my suit. But the truth could only be held back for so long. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the apartment grew palpable. The charade of keeping Nathan alive for the sake of appearances was rapidly becoming impossible. I was increasingly wearing women's loungewear around the house, soft modal leggings, delicate camisoles, and fuzzy pink socks. I started practicing makeup techniques for hours every evening, obsessively watching tutorials until my eyeliner was razor sharp and my contouring looked professionally done. Emily, to her immense credit, tried to be supportive, but the dynamic of our relationship was shifting irrevocably. The boyfriend she had loved was slowly fading into a memory, replaced by a complex, high-maintenance roommate who frequently borrowed her skirts and spent more time in front of the vanity than she did. The definitive breaking point occurred on a rainy Friday evening. I was standing in front of the full-length mirror, lost in a trance. I had slipped into a slinky blush pink satin slip dress. The fabric was practically liquid, clinging elegantly to the silicone hip pads and the padded bra beneath. I had carefully styled a wavy auburn wig, securing a delicate gold necklace around my throat. The sheer weightlessness of the silk against my bare legs, the gentle swoosh of the fabric as I twirled slightly. It was a hypnotic, utterly intoxicating sensory experience that completely consumed me. "We need to talk." Emily's voice broke through the reverie. She was standing in the bedroom doorway, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Her eyes weren't angry, but they were incredibly sad, reflecting a painful realization that had been brewing for weeks. I instantly froze, a blush of embarrassment creeping up my neck. I instinctively crossed my arms over the plunging neckline of the slip dress. Is everything okay? Did I leave makeup on the counter again? It's not the makeup, Nathan, she sighed, taking a step into the room and sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked at me, taking in the wig, the delicate gold jewelry, the immaculate curve of my artificial silhouette. Look at yourself. Look at Olivia. I slowly lowered my arms, smoothing my hands nervously down the slick. Pink satin. My heart began to pound a rapid, frantic rhythm against my ribs. You love Olivia more than you love me, don't you? She asked, her voice cracking slightly, though there were no tears in her eyes. It was a statement masquerading as a question. The silent stretch between us, thick and suffocating. The male instinct to lie, to comfort her, to promise I would pack it all away and be a good boyfriend surged to the surface. But looking down at the pink silk hugging my thighs, I knew that lie would destroy us both. I walked slowly toward the bed, my bare feet sinking into the soft carpet. I sat down next to her, the delicate straps of the slip dress shifting against my shoulders. I reached out, placing my manicured hand over hers. Emily, I started, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't try to lower my pitch. I let the natural vulnerability bleed through. You are the one who opened this door for me. I will forever be grateful to you for that night with the green dress. But the feeling of being called Olivia, the way this silk feels against my skin, it's not a fetish. It's not a game anymore. It's the only time I feel like I'm actually breathing. I love you, Emily, but this love cannot save the woman desperately screaming to be let out of this body. She offered a weak, incredibly sad smile, gently squeezing my hand before pulling hers away. I know, I've known for weeks. I think part of me knew the night of the gala when you danced with that man. You looked more alive in that hour than you had in the entire 3 years we've been together. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her jeans, looking at me with a painful, bittersweet acceptance. You have to choose her, Nathan, or Olivia, I should say. You have to let him go completely. We spent the weekend packing my things. It was a heartbreaking process, filled with long hugs, shared tears, and the quiet mourning of a love story that had dramatically changed course. As I packed my small collection of feminine clothing, carefully folding the green chiffon dress, the crimson sweater, the burgundy jumpsuit, and the blush pink silk, I felt a profound sense of mourning for Nathan, but an even deeper, terrifying excitement for what lay ahead. Moving into a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city marked the true death of Nathan. Living alone meant I didn't have to hide. I threw away every single pair of rigid, abrasive men's jeans. I donated my boxy t-shirts. The transformation was aggressive and unapologetic. Within a month, I made the appointment that cemented my point of no return. Sitting in the endocrinologist's office, my stomach was a bundle of agonizing nerves. But when the doctor handed me the small, innocuous-looking prescription bottle of estradiol pills, a massive wave of euphoric relief washed over me. I wasn't just wearing the costume anymore. I was rebuilding the architecture of my body. The physical changes from hormone replacement therapy were slow at first, then miraculously terrifying. The first thing to change was my skin. Within a few weeks, the coarse, oily texture of my male skin began to soften, becoming unbelievably delicate and smooth to the touch. The constant friction of coarse fabric became irritating. My body began demanding softer materials. Then came the fat redistribution. My rigid male runner's physique began to melt. The muscle mass in my upper body decreased significantly, my shoulders sloping downwards, losing their broad, imposing dominance. The fat slowly migrated, filling out my hips and thighs, rounding my rear end, creating a natural soft curvature that made skirts hang and sway in a completely different, entirely natural way. The most sensitive and undeniable change arrived in month 4. I woke up one morning and winced sharply when I accidentally brushed my arm against my chest. There, behind the tight cotton of my nightgown, were 2 distinct, painful, tender buds. My natural breasts were growing. I didn't need the heavily padded push-up bras anymore. The feeling of natural cleavage pressing against a soft lace bralette was an addictive, thrilling sensation that confirmed physically and undeniably that my male body was quietly surrendering to Olivia. Emotionally, the hormones cracked me wide open. I was no longer the stoic, emotionally stunted Nathan. I became intensely empathetic, bursting into tears over a sappy commercial, laughing hysterically at a silly joke, feeling everything with a profound, terrifying intensity. During this intense period of medical transition, I slowly integrated into the local LGBTQ+ community, frequenting support groups, drag shows, and trans mixers. At a lively local fashion show, I met Ruby, a fiercely confident trans woman who became my anchor. We were sitting backstage, surrounded by a chaotic flurry of sequins, hairspray, and discarded stiletto heels. I was wearing a sleek, tailored black mini dress with sheer pattern tights and a bold, smoky eye. "Girl, your transformation is serving absolute devastation," Ruby laughed, dramatically snapping her fan open and pointing it at me. "The confidence you're radiating right now that cannot be bought in a Sephora. That's pure, unfiltered authenticity, honey." I looked down at the black mini dress, marveling at how naturally it hugged the new, medically softened curves of my hips and the very real swell of my chest. I let out a bright, genuine musical laugh, a sound that Olivia had fully claimed. The anxiety of being found out was completely gone. I wasn't pretending. I was a woman. "It feels like I finally woke up from a 27-year coma." I smiled brightly, adjusting the strap of my dress with an effortless, feminine grace that no longer required conscious thought. But as my body aligned with my soul, the gaping, painful absence of my family remained an open wound. Almost an entire year had passed since that disastrous Sunday afternoon in the burgundy jumpsuit. I had sent a few tentative emails to my mother, which she replied to kindly but briefly, usually ending with a vague, apologetic note about how my father was still struggling. Then, unexpectedly, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. My heart slammed against my ribs as I recognized my father's distinct, rigid handwriting on the front. With trembling, perfectly manicured fingers, I slit the envelope open. Inside was a short, formal invitation. My parents were requesting my presence for a quiet dinner at their favorite upscale downtown restaurant the following weekend. There was a handwritten postscript at the bottom, penned in my father's cramped script we would like to try and understand. I sat on the edge of my bed, the heavy envelope slipping from my hands onto the soft carpet. The panic was instantaneous and suffocating. A year of therapy, hormone changes, and hard-fought confidence felt dangerously fragile against the looming specter of my father's disapproval. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, my soft skin, my natural chest filling out the silk camisole, my real shoulder-length auburn hair cascading past my collarbones, I took a deep, steadying breath. I was no longer the terrified person playing dress-up in the hallway. I was Olivia, and Olivia was ready to go home. The evening of the dinner arrived with a heavy, oppressive sense of impending doom. I stood before the full-length mirror in my apartment, my stomach churning violently, as if a flock of angry birds were trapped beneath my ribs. Every instinct honed over 27 years of desperately seeking my father's approval screamed at me to dress down, to wear something neutral, perhaps a shapeless pantsuit or an oversized sweater. "Don't provoke him," a quiet, lingering echo of Nathan whispered. But I brutally shoved that voice into the darkest corner of my mind. I was not going to hide the woman I had become, but I also didn't need to wear the flashy, defiant armor of the burgundy jumpsuit or a sky-high stiletto. This wasn't an act of rebellion anymore. It was simply my life. I chose a classic, impeccably tailored look. I slipped into a pair of straight-leg, high-waisted cream trousers that gently emphasized the new, hormone-softened curve of my hips. Over that, I wore a crisp white silk blouse, leaving the top 2 buttons open just enough to reveal a delicate gold pendant resting against my collarbone, and the undeniable, natural swell of my breasts securely held by a soft, unpadded lace bra. I stepped into a pair of sophisticated, low-heeled beige loafers. Sitting at the vanity, I kept the makeup incredibly minimal, a flawless base, a touch of mascara, a swipe of rose-tinted gloss, and my real, shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back into an elegant, low chignon, secured with pearl hairpins. I added simple pearl stud earrings to match. The woman in the mirror wasn't Nathan playing a daring game. She was a professional, poised, sophisticated woman in her late 20s. She looked incredibly capable, elegant, and heartbreakingly real. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the soft silk of the blouse rustling gently against my skin. grabbed my beige trench coat, and headed out the door. The restaurant was a dimly lit, high-end Italian establishment with white tablecloths and heavy mahogany paneling. Exactly the kind of old-school, traditional place my father loved. I gave my name to the hostess, specifically requesting the reservation under Robert. As the hostess led me through the maze of candlelit tables, my knees threatened to buckle with every step. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to bury them deep inside the pockets of my trench coat. I spotted them immediately, sitting in a quiet, secluded booth in the back corner. My father looked remarkably older, the deep lines around his mouth more pronounced. My mother looked nervous, obsessively shredding a paper napkin into tiny pieces. As I approached the table, my mother looked up. Her eyes went incredibly wide, not with horror, but with profound astonishment. She gasped softly, her hands flying to cover her mouth. My father slowly looked up from his menu. I braced for the yelling, the red face, the inevitable command to leave. I stopped 2 feet from the table, my heart pounding loudly enough to rival the low, melodic jazz playing in the background. "Good evening," I said softly. Thanks to voice therapy and months of practice, my pitch was naturally higher, lighter, devoid of the forced bass that used to resonate in Nathan's chest. For 10 agonizing seconds, my father simply stared. His eyes roved over the elegant silk blouse, the pearl earrings, the neat professional bun, the gentle, unquestionable femininity of my silhouette. The anger that had ignited the hallway a year ago was entirely absent. In its place was a complicated, painful mixture of confusion, shock, and strangely a quiet awe. He didn't see a caricature. He didn't see a rebellious costume. He saw a grown, deeply composed woman looking back at him with terrified but resolute eyes. "Hello," he grunted finally, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. He cleared his throat forcefully. "Please, sit down." The relief was so absolute it was nearly dizzying. I slipped out of my trench coat, draping it over the back of the chair, and carefully slid into the booth across from them. The silk of my trousers glided smoothly against the leather seating. I kept my posture impeccable, shoulders back, knees together, hands resting delicately in my lap. "Nathan," my mother started automatically, before catching herself with a violent flinch. She bit her lip nervously. "I mean, you look incredibly elegant." "Thank you, Mom." I smiled softly, reaching across the table to gently squeeze her trembling hand. "I appreciate you both asking me to come." The dinner was the most agonizingly awkward meal of my entire life. We spoke in careful, overly polite sentences about the weather, my new apartment, and the appetizers. My father studiously avoided looking directly at my chest or my makeup, focusing primarily on his veal scallopini and the glass of red wine he consumed rather quickly. But as the main courses were cleared away and the waiter brought 2 small espressos, the suffocating politeness finally cracked. My father placed his espresso cup down heavily on the saucer. The sharp clink echoed in the quiet corner booth. He rested his large forearms on the white tablecloth, interlocking his fingers, and finally looked me directly, unflinchingly, in the eyes. "I don't understand this," he started, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that made my pulse spike with sudden dread. "I don't think I am ever going to understand this. You were my son. I raised a boy who loved baseball, who fixed cars with me in the garage." He stopped, closing his eyes tightly for a moment, an expression of profound, agonizing grief washing over his weathered features. The pain radiating from him was palpable, a heavy grief for a child who was technically dead, sitting directly across from him. "I don't understand the medicine. I don't understand the clothes. I don't understand why God made you this way," he continued, his voice wavering slightly, cracking under the immense weight of his own confusion. I sat perfectly still, holding my breath, preparing for the final devastating rejection. He opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, shimmering with unshed tears. He looked at the silk blouse, the soft curve of my jaw, the serene, terrified calmness in my eyes. But he swallowed hard, a single tear escaping the corner of his eye and tracking down his rough cheek. "When you sat across from me at Christmas 3 years ago, I looked into my son's eyes, and I saw a miserable, hollow, deeply unhappy person holding on by a thread. I saw a ghost." He reached across the table. With a trembling, calloused hand, he gently covered my perfectly manicured fingers. I look at you tonight, he whispered, his voice completely breaking. And I don't understand you, but I don't see the agony anymore. The terror is gone. You look alive, and I am far too old and too tired to lose my only living child to my own stubborn pride. I just want you to be happy. The dam broke. The composure I had clung to so desperately shattered into a million pieces. A loud, wretched sob ripped from my throat. I squeezed his large, rough hand with both of mine, tears freely spilling down my cheeks, ruining my carefully applied concealer, completely destroying the elegant facade. I cried not from sorrow, but from the most overwhelming, catastrophic wave of absolute relief. My mother reached across the table, wrapping her arms around both our hands, weeping loudly in the middle of the quiet Italian restaurant. "Oh, Olivia," she sobbed, finally using the name, the sound of it dropping like a beautiful melodic bell in the heavy silence. "My beautiful, beautiful girl, we love you so much." I sat in the booth, sobbing into my father's hand, the soft silk of my blouse heaving against my chest. The agonizing war that had waged inside my mind for over a year finally fell silent. The fear of rejection, the shame, the terrifying act of rebuilding my body, it had all led to this quiet, sacred booth. The walls of prejudice had crumbled, not with a furious battle, but with the quiet, overwhelming realization of love. The healing process was incredibly slow and undeniably awkward over the next year. My father constantly slipped up on pronouns, often catching himself with a frustrated sigh and a quick, gruff apology. My mother, conversely, dove headfirst into my new reality. She insisted on taking me shopping, gushing over finding the perfect A-line skirts to flatter my new hips. Entirely giddy at the prospect of finally having the daughter-in-law shopping experience she thought she had missed out on. Emily, too, remained a beautiful constant in my life. She transitioned seamlessly from the grieving girlfriend into a fiercely loyal confidant. She would frequently come over to my apartment, sitting on my bed drinking wine, critiquing my outfit choices, and laughing about the absurdity of our journey. I am incredibly proud to say I birthed Olivia out of a plastic shopping bag containing a punishment dress. She laughed one evening, aggressively buffing her nails. And then, exactly a year after my HRT began, an exquisite, embossed cream envelope arrived at my apartment. I stared at the heavy gold lettering of the invitation, my heart doing a familiar frantic flutter. It was an invitation to the annual downtown charity gala. I ran my fingers over the elegant script. I was not the terrified, clumsy man awkwardly balanced on stilettos, hoping no one noticed the costume. I was an invited guest. The evening of the gala, I stood in front of my full-length mirror, taking in the culmination of the most transformative year of my existence. I wasn't wearing a borrowed, punishing chiffon dress. I was wearing a magnificent crimson-red mermaid gown that I had selected myself. The fabric hugged the very real, medically induced curves of my hips and waist with absolute perfection. The plunging sweetheart neckline confidently displayed the natural swell of my chest, requiring no padded bras or artificial enhancements. A delicate diamond choker sparkled against my throat, accenting the graceful slope of my shoulders. I had carefully curled my real shoulder-length auburn hair into soft, old Hollywood waves, letting them fall dramatically over one side. I had sheathed my legs in ultra-sheer nude pantyhose, completing the ensemble with a pair of delicate, strappy 4-inch stilettos that I now wore with the effortless grace of someone entirely comfortable in their own skin. I grabbed my satin clutch, my chest swelling with a quiet, fierce pride. When I walked through the grand glass doors of the ballroom, the crystal chandeliers cast the exact same fractured, dazzling light across the room as they had a year ago. The classical string quartet played in the corner, a sea of tuxedos and gowns swirling around the dance floor. But this time, as I stepped onto the polished wood, the sensation wasn't terror. It was pure, unfiltered command. Every step in my 4-inch heels was smooth, deliberate, and fiercely elegant. The crimson gown swished sensually against the sheer nylon on my legs. I felt the eyes of several men linger appreciatively on my silhouette as I glided toward the bar. I wasn't an imposter hoping to remain invisible. I was Olivia, demanding to be seen. I ordered a glass of champagne, leaning gracefully against the polished marble counter, the soft, expensive fabric of my gown pooling elegantly around my ankles. I was wondering if I would ever have the privilege of seeing you again, The voice came from behind me, deep, warm, rich like aged oak, carrying the faint, intoxicating scent of cedar wood cologne. I gasped softly, freezing mid-sip. I turned around slowly, the crimson gown swirling gently around my calves. Arthur stood there in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo, looking incredibly handsome, a glass of bourbon in his hand. His dark eyes widened fractionally as he took in the crimson dress, the natural curves, the profound, undeniable confidence radiating from me. The hesitant, terrified mystery girl from a year ago had been replaced by a striking, formidable woman. His eyes locked onto mine, a spark of profound recognition and genuine awe igniting in his gaze. He offered a slight, deeply respectful bow of his head. "Olivia," he breathed, his voice carrying a soft, amazed reverence. "You look absolutely extraordinary tonight. I looked for you at 3 separate events this year. I thought you had vanished like a beautiful dream." I stood there, the heavy diamond choker resting against my collarbone, my heart pounding a familiar, frantic rhythm, not out of terror of being exposed, but from the raw, beautiful vulnerability of finally being truly seen. I didn't need to force my voice into a breathless, breathy whisper anymore. My voice was naturally lighter, carrying the musical, feminine cadence of a woman entirely at peace with her soul. I offered him a brilliant, completely unshielded smile, taking a small step forward, the delicate straps of my heels clicking confidently against the marble. "I haven't vanished, Arthur," I said, my voice clear and melodic over the low hum of the ballroom. I reached out, resting my manicured fingers lightly on his suited arm, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric. I was just busy finding myself, and tonight I have absolutely nothing left to hide. I looked across the ballroom. In the VIP section, my mother was smiling proudly in her pearl necklace, and my father offered a slow, approving nod from over his scotch glass. At a nearby table, Emily raised her champagne flute toward me, a triumphant grin on her face. I turned back to Arthur, his dark eyes filled with absolute captivation. I had wagered my entire life on a seemingly impossible, agonizing bet against society, against my family, against my own terrified male ego. And as the orchestra began to play a slow romantic waltz, Arthur gently pulled me into his arms, leading me onto the center of the dance floor. The crimson silk flowed against my thighs, my chest resting securely against his. I had finally, unequivocally, won the bet. I wasn't just a perfect woman for a night. I was a perfectly flawed, beautifully reborn woman for the rest of my life.